It is 6:46 p.m. Having called the meeting to order, the first item of business is to discuss any updates from the MPO formation. Jeff Sanborn.
All right, thank you, John. Patrick, Jane, and I attended the Tri-Cities meeting today, and as I indicated to you a couple of weeks ago, the intent for that Tri-Cities meeting was to bring in all of the local government representatives from the local governments that are within the boundaries of the urbanized zone that has triggered this requirement for an MPO. And to refresh everybody's memories, that includes Pinehurst, Aberdeen, Southern Pines, Taylortown, Pine Bluff, and Whispering Pines, and in addition to Moore County, because some of the unincorporated areas around our towns are also included in that urbanized zone. It was pretty well attended. I think we had representatives at the meeting from every local government except for Taylortown. That was unfortunate, I guess, but it's, that's kind of happened in the past as well. We received kind of an abbreviated presentation about how different MPOs are structured in different parts of North Carolina and as well as in South Carolina and Virginia, with regard to board makeup and size, and how different urbanized zones decided to structure their geographical area, whether or not it included an entire county or not. I think what we saw was that in general, the smaller MPOs were, with some exceptions, but almost always did not include the entire county, and instead were centered around that smaller footprint. So if you could envision southern Moore County. And another thing that kind of jumped out was that the smaller MPOs, I think, almost by rule, there may have been an exception or two, had their lead planning, the lead planning agency was I think always a city.
Yes.
For the smaller MPOs. Now, as it got bigger, sometimes it was a county, and sometimes it was a COG, like we have Triangle JCOG, or some other organization. So there was some good discussion in the room about the geographical footprint that might be appropriate. And I don't think it would be fair to say that everybody in the room agreed that the footprint should be small, kind of tight around our southern Moore County municipalities that are in the urbanized zone. But the comments we heard kind of suggested that that was the preference. Maybe with one exception. I think we got it kind of, although the representatives from Moore County didn't come out and say it, I kind of got the impression that they would prefer it to be bigger, or maybe even the whole county or something. But from the municipalities that were represented there, I think that there was a general preference for keeping it in close to the defined urban zone boundaries. And to remind everybody that there are some specific requirements in law about what has to be within the MPO geographic boundary. And it has to, first off, it has to include every parcel or every piece of property that was in the defined urban zone, right? But then it also has to include the areas outside that urban zone that the local governments involved think might be urbanized within a 20-year time period. But that, there's no definition of what qualifies something to be considered likely to be urbanized in a 20-year time frame. So it's up to our jurisdictions to make that decision. We talked about the idea of maybe taking that urbanized zone and creating a couple of examples for the local governments to consider. One of those might be just taking what we have right now for the urbanized zone in our 6 municipalities, and then also including all of our ETJs, and then maybe smoothing the lines around that. Or maybe also taking into consideration, like if you think about our area, like in Pinehurst, right? To me, we have our ETJ down to the south and west, but it's actually less likely to develop than the thing that's not our ETJ, which is up to the north of us, just north of Taylortown and up to around the Juniper Lake Road area. So maybe we would include something like that. Pat and Jane can correct me if I didn't hear this right, but I think the suggestion was that what we left the room was that the managers of the major municipalities should get together and put together one or more examples of what this appropriate area might look like, and then bring it back to the next meeting, which was, John, you got this invite too, for the 17th of April, but that conflicted with our next council meeting.
11th.
I'm sorry,
11th
11th of April, yeah, right. So that's going to have to be rescheduled. But so that will be the next opportunity for us to engage with the group about what this geographic area might look like. There was also some discussion about this idea of the lead planning organization and the host agency for that lead planning organization. I had suggested to you in the past that maybe we should raise our hand, since we're the biggest local government involved in this. I don't know who it is, but Matt Day made it clear that there are other entities that also have expressed a desire to be the lead planning agency. And so I think what we learned, though, is that if we do have a desire to be considered for the lead planning agency, we also need to bring that back to this next meeting in April. And then we would continue that dialogue, and the group could then start to move forward to select what the best lead planning agency is among the organizations that have raised their hands, say we're willing to do this.
Yeah, Jeff?
Who makes that
excuse me.
decision? Who makes that decision?
Sorry?
Who makes that decision? The lead, well, you've got, if several of us want it, then who makes the decision?
The local governments. Now, I'm a little bit fuzzy. I have to go back and look at the law. I know that, so with regard to the geographic boundary, the geographic boundary has to be approved by vote of the of local governments that represent at least 75% of the population base of the urbanized zone that was defined by the census. I don't recall if that same rule applies to the, oh, and it also has to be specifically approved by the largest city, which means Pinehurst has a veto.
And that's just in drawing the geographical boundary.
That's not a geographical boundary. I don't recall if the same rule applies to the designation of the lead planning agency, and by extension, really, because I think that would be part of the MOU. So I don't know if that same rule applies to the MOU, which would include the designation of the lead planning agency, or not. And if it doesn't, then I think it would just be a majority vote of all of the local governments that are in the agreement.
And also with the geographical boundaries, is that subjective determination, or are there objective criteria like growth projections or something more objective than just, oh, I think I want the boundary to be here? Is there
So,
some methodology that works?
The required methodology does not have to be formal. That doesn't mean that we couldn't take a formal approach of some sort, but there's no bar we have to get over.
You could include part of your ETJ. That was one of the issues that was
Yeah.
raised.
But, like Jeff said, our ETJ is, the development potential there is not that great, but if you've got, I'm just thinking about growth projections that might have some bearing on where these lines should be.
Jeff, you threw, I had a few other things to mention on top of what you were saying. One was that the MOU eventually will need to be signed by a bunch of parties, including the governor.
Yep.
So that's why there's this hard timetable to get a document to where it has to go so it can get into the Vegematic around the governor and we get his signature. Two, there's a discussion about the size of the governing board. I suggested that the first governing board be rather small, so we can grow it if we want to down the road, but that initially it be small, containing the representatives from the cities actually affected, so that we can have a good takeoff in the way we organize this entity. And third, I didn't think it was Matt. I thought it was the other fella in the red shirt who raised that issue about other outside entities for LPAs. You know the guy sitting in the corner?
That
was Scott
Not
Massa.
NCDOT fella, the guy sitting in front of him, heavyset guy.
Yes,
Lee?
and he's the guy who is usually the MC at these meetings.
That's Lee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just to my own memory of sitting around the table. We, as Jeff described it, we sort of need to get cooperative early with our counterparts so that we don't drag out these decisions. And one is for the village managers to get together and chit-chat and figure out what might be a good recommendation for all their respective councils to consider. Two is this meeting that Jeff and the mayor would go to. So all that can take place in the next, 3 weeks or so. And then we might be in a position as a council to have some solid things to consider. Does that sound reasonable?
Right.
Okay, that was my memory.
I think that, so kind of the takeaway for, well, we could talk about a lot of things here tonight, but I think to facilitate what Pat just described, what I'm looking for is your agreement that we probably want to keep this tight, closer to the core local governments. That's point one. And two, are we willing to throw our name in the hat for lead planning
Now,
agency?
Jeff, on that second point,
Yeah.
and as we discussed a little bit last time, and we're learning more as time goes on, was there much of a discussion about all the responsibilities of the organizing town? How much more work is that going to be based upon what others have said?
It's some. I think that, so if you think about it from the resourcing side, we would have to hire and manage an employee, a new employee. We would have to manage a new fund. Our finance department would have to manage a new fund that would deal with the finances of this organization.
Jeff, wasn't it 20% from the communities and 80% from the federal government?
Right.
Okay.
But all of that would have to go into an MPO fund.
Right.
That would have to be managed by our finance department.
I'm looking at the workload. That's the issue for me.
Again, somebody's got to do it. So we would have to provide IT support, and that IT support would have to provide firewall protections to make sure that we aren't, that we aren't taking inappropriate advantage of the fact that we have that organization embedded in our organization. From what I understand, it's typical for that employee that we hire and that we manage, that person reports to the board, to the MPO board, but they would typically have a supervisor, a host supervisor within the, the host agency.
That's an interesting structure, though, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is. It's a little different, but somebody's got to, provide for the care and feeding of the employer, right? So
Right.
that's a loose term, but
Yeah.
right.
No, I understand that.
Yeah,
So that's, yeah. So it's not inconsequential, and especially when we get into the financial side of it, the maintaining of a separate account, the IT issues for the central organization. That's.
I don't think there'd be a lot of financial transactions, though. You're talking about a few, planning, grant, you take the grant money in, you take the donations from the other local governments in, you pay the payroll for one more employee, and you pay the bills for planning products, whether it's contracted effort that that the MPO is has hired to have done, or if it's, done through other means.
Jane?
But then the board would have a representative from each of the towns, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So there's 6 towns in the county. And the county, it's not the whole county. It's just a few little polka dots. It's the white dots, little white areas on that map, John. And so the county has actually a very small amount of land within this area. And so that's 7 people. And then we have to have somebody from the DOT.
Yeah.
So that's
That's
8.
typically the board member, the local board member, DOT board.
DOT board, so in our case, that would be who?
Lisa?
Okay, I see. Right.
What is this tiny little county piece up here north of Taylortown? It's this odd little white piece.
Yeah, that's the satellite part of us.
That's Taylortown satellite. What's the name of that,
Oh,
something?
that's
Yeah,
right.
Eastwood?
Taylor
No,
Town,
not
sorry.
Petty Eastwood, but,
It is Taylortown. Well, but it's unincorporated. Wait, is it Taylor? It seemed like if it's Taylortown, like it was annexed into Taylortown, it'd be Taylortown.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, the white,
Yeah.
no, that's, what is that called? It's that new subdivision that went in at the corner of Murdochsville Road and Juniper Lake Road.
Got it.
You know what I'm talking about? Yep. Yeah.
The skinny pine trees.
yeah. Jeff, that's quite a good report. So the issue is really, and you'd like our confirmation or not, whether we should raise our hand to be the managing partner, or whatever you call it, and then how we feel about the structure, with the size of the space and how that would be done. On the size of the space, what is your position on that? The size of the map here? How much more?
Yeah, I think in this, I will tell you that in private conversations I've had with Paul and Reagan, we all agree that it should be something that's held tight to southern Moore County. Now, how tight? I mean, that's a good question, and I think that, if we, most appropriately, we would probably be bringing an example or more than one example back to, all of our elected officials for these local governments, and there's going to be some back and forth about, how far out this line should be.
Yep.
I don't, but the general idea is to keep it relatively close into our municipal boundaries.
The federal government will, with each successive census,
Yeah.
redesign the boundaries anyway.
Right.
And we can, if we want to, expand it or change it in between censuses. So if we're willing to do the paperwork.
Okay. All right. Jeff Sanborn, you remain of the opinion we should raise our hand. How does council feel about that? Is that something we think we should have our staff take on? It's,
Well, I agree. I think it was, maybe it was just our last meeting where I think Dr. Morgan mentioned something about if we're going to be involved in this, we ought to probably take a stake in it early on. And so it seems to me that's probably the right course of action here.
I still feel that way too.
works for you, Jeff
Yeah,
Morgan?
I still feel that way also. We're the big player in, population-wise and things like that we have, and so I think that it's a great role for Pinehurst. So.
Jane?
Yeah, so I think we're biggest. We have room in our facilities, and we have wonderful meeting spaces too. I mean, so the board's going to have a place to meet, and
Centrally located. I mean,
yeah.
Are we really the biggest?
Sorry?
What would Southern Pines say with population? We're almost neck and neck right now, are we?
they're the ones who said we were the biggest.
Yeah,
For now.
I don't,
I
By a
pointed out
couple
we were the
not that
best
it matters,
town,
but I
too,
think
and
the other
nobody liked
points are
that.
well taken. Jane, I'm sorry.
I pointed out we were the best town,
We're the best. Yeah, let's do that. They'll buy that.
that one,
All right.
but we are.
So what I'm hearing is go forward with the idea that we would be the, what do they call it? The
Lead planning
lead
agency.
planning agency. And tightness rather than expansion as to size would be our preferred approach. Is that fair, council?
Yeah.
All right. Was there any other point you wanted us to talk about tonight on the MPO? Or any other aspects of it that Pat or Jane have?
No, I mean, to go back with the timeline. So we've been coached that in order to get there in time, it would be very helpful if we as a group of local governments can agree on a geographic boundary by the end of June. And then after we talked about that for a while, there was also a suggestion that maybe we should figure out who the lead planning agency is earlier versus later as well. But there wasn't a specific timeline associated with that. And then, once we've got that, once we've got those two pieces nailed down, we've got basically the rest of the calendar year to finalize the MOU. I guess I'd add a caveat to that, though, because all of our municipalities are having elections this year. And so it might be very helpful if we all target trying to get the municipalities to approve the MOU before the election, because, I mean, after that, you got new boards and organization days in December, and, I mean,
Yeah, I agree with that.
getting
I agree.
new people up to speed.
Shouldn't take us that long.
Agreeing on things is probably pretty slim, so,
I think that's wise also.
Yeah, we're going to have to get that thing written
yeah.
way before December.
Yeah.
Because then got to be presented to each of these different towns and,
Yeah.
Jeff,
I think it's going to need to be written by September.
Jeff
Yeah.
Sanborn, didn't we ask for a copy of a document as an example from them today? And they're going to give us one?
we did.
Yeah, and I can give them to you. I've downloaded
I'm
a couple
not
examples.
looking at it. I just want to make sure you had it,
No,
and so
yeah,
we
yeah,
had something
yeah.
to work from. Okay.
I know where to find them. Yeah.
Okay.
We're not recreating the wheel.
Okay. Any other questions on the MPO?
Now, not on that issue, but there was one thing I should have mentioned earlier that was brought up today at that meeting, and that the Triangle J moniker
Yeah.
is being done away with. And I don't know if you've ran into this in any of your meetings.
Yeah, that was actually at our meeting. They've chosen the pine cone, which
The Central Pine something or another.
yeah, their symbol now is a pine cone.
A pine
And
cone, okay.
I responded on the little text message in the meeting that Pinehurst totally approves.
They want to be us.
And that's when, and then I discussed again, as I
Okay.
mentioned to you before, all of our attributes, and they want to do a road trip now, so.
Is there any other work session business tonight? No. And how about future agenda items? We have a lot of loose ends out there, always, and what needs follow-up in a work session for 2 weeks from now? I'd have to look at some
I have a question. Will we be doing any extra meetings for budgeting? You know, I know in the past we've had some extra budgeting meetings. Will we be having some, do we need to start?
Sessions in May, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't recall which week that is, but we'll, as is usually, as has historically been the case, we'll schedule 2, and we may not need them both.
okay, so we need to start getting those dates on our calendar.
I think we have those dates, don't we, for May? Didn't we get a date from Dana? No.
Is it possible,
Could we get those set fairly soon then, the dates, potential dates for budget work session?
is it possible to have them
And-
take place in a work session that we have regularly scheduled? A budget meeting? I'm just trying to think from
It
scheduling
takes,
purposes.
it takes, well, they typically take several hours. Like a whole afternoon, and then maybe the next afternoon if we have to come back, I think is the way it typically is.
And I hope there's some flexibility on those dates we're going to choose here.
Yeah.
I've got a couple things planned right now.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
Well,
But
maybe-
ultimately, we can do it any way you all want to do it, so. So
Well, why don't we,
if we had to break it up over a few evenings, we could do that as well.
Maybe, yeah, why don't you serve up some dates and time periods,
Yeah.
and then we can look at it. And then the only other thing I guess we need to finish up on the NAC at some point. I know there's another.
right. Well, the next NAC meeting is almost a month away still.
Right,
Uh,
but I'm
between-
just.
Yeah. Jeff and I were looking at that, and we'll get with you, Pat, on that too.
Okay.
I think it's coming around. All right, so no suggestions just now for future agenda items other than NAC, and we'll work on the dates for the budget meetings. Okay. Is there any other business to come before the council? Is there-
One more question. The budget, our request for a budget appropriation, do we know when that needs to be into either Senator McGinnis or is that something we need to, you know, they've asked to, they'll put items in the budget.
I don't know that they've communicated anything directly to us, have they? Yeah.
I was
I know we
working, I
talked
was
about
working
the-
from the email from McGinnis's office, I think. I don't know if it had dates in it. I'd have to look back at it, but
I don't think it did. I just don't want us
I
to go
thought
by
I
a
would've-
date that might be there and miss the opportunity to get something in that budget that could help us.
Yeah. And how about the CVB submission?
April 20th is when they're having their meeting to determine what the program is going to look like.
Oh, so we got time.
Yeah, we got. Thanks for asking.
Jeff, let's check, I'll check with you on those dates for the state. I think that would be good. Anything else? All right, is there a motion to adjourn the work session?
Motion to adjourn the work session.
That's a motion by Pat Pizzella. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jane Hogeman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The work session is adjourned for March 28th. Thank you.